Greetings, greetings, greetings. Happy Thursday, Juneteenth family. How is everybody doing today? Thursday Lunch and Learn. We are back again. Today with us, we have C. Zawadi Morris. She's a Chicago native who moved to Brooklyn in 1997. She's a journalist who has a passion for writing, social justice, photography, cooking, sewing, traveling, and learning as many foreign languages as possible. We're going to lunch and learn today with Zawadi as she speaks with us and tells us and talks with us about her experience as being the first Black family to integrate an all white suburb of Chicago and how that led her to finding her passion for writing, to eventually become the first Black woman to launch a digital daily newspaper in Brooklyn. And I believe that's called the Brooklyn Reader. Please bring Zawadi up for us, please, Medi. Hey, Zawadi, how are you? Welcome. What a great
Hi,
smile.
Jamie. How are
Hi,
you? I'm doing
I
great.
am
Thank you for
really,
having
really
me.
well. Thanks for joining us today. So, Zawadi is, I've learned in the last few minutes, we met before we came into the space, and I've definitely learned that she's a self cheerleader. She is a warrior for self awareness and self assurance, and has some sayings that we'll talk a little bit more about that are her favorites, her favorite slogans and mantra. I call it a mantra. When I'm looking at it and how she explained it to me, I'm going to adopt it as a mantra. But for now, I'm going to welcome you to share with us what you shared today. I will hang back, but I'll stay on screen just in case to support you, just in case anything comes up from the community. Community, please feel free to ask questions. Drop your questions in the comment box, and Medi and I will do our best to get those answered for you. And I pass you over the mic, C. Zawadi.
Hi, yes. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, everybody who's decided to tune in today during your lunch to be with me. I appreciate it. I'm so humbled. And I'm excited to talk today. And I welcome any questions. So I'll start by backing up a little bit and telling you about myself because I'm from Chicago, and that's very significant for me because it has informed so much of who I am today and the way I think and the way I move. Um, I had a friend, actually a colleague, at a lunch a couple of days ago that I actually just met at the table, and I told him I was from Chicago, and he asked me what felt like a kind of strange question. He said, "How do you like Chicago? What is Chicago like? And what do you feel about it?" And I realized at the time that I look at it because it's so much a part of me. I look at it almost like a family member. You have your grumps and your growls and the things that you don't like about it and the things that you wish you could change about it, that you keep to yourself or you speak about privately, but overall you love it, and it is you. So Chicago for me was very formative in helping me to realize not only my dreams, but my passions, what it is that I wanted to do. So I don't know if you know, but Chicago was at one point and still is to this day one of the most segregated cities in the United States. And when I was coming up in Chicago, it was
Uh-oh, Zawadi dropped off. Let's give her a moment to come back into the studio. I will hold space for her and hold the community down. I'll I'll share that I was back here laughing. I said, that's a funny question. I am a new resident of Atlanta, but I come from New York. That is a city that has a lot of energy, much like Chicago. And I'm just imagining someone asking me that question, and it all would have depended upon the day, the time, what has taken place in the last 24 hours on how I would have felt about my home state. First off, I love it. I definitely love it. But having had lived and born and raised in New York 45 years, I definitely had enough. I was ready to pass the baton and let someone else learn that experience. What do I like about living there? Well, I love the trains. I loved having access to public transportation. I love the energy. Um, the higher vibrational side of the energy, not the lower vibrational, because it can be very draining as well. But the fun, the Times Square energy, just the nice folks, when people think that you won't get assistance and you actually still do get kind-hearted people that will help you travel places. What else? Many, are we able to, is, did Zawadi communicate with you yet? Okay, super. Thank you. Yes, yes, yes. Oh, I love the technical difficulties. So, in the meantime, I'll share some things because I know we have had folks in the community inboxing and asking different questions about our Juneteenth event that's coming up this June, the full weekend. So, sharing that there are opportunities for sponsorship, there's opportunities for vendors. Ah, she's back. And there's also opportunities for performers. So if you're interested in either of those three, feel free to inbox us and I will pass back over to Zawadi. And Medi, you know what? Me in the screen with her, but make her the larger screen and make me the smaller screen, just in case I need to pop in for support or anything like that.
So I was speaking the entire time. I just kept it going.
I love.
I wasn't sure
I love.
if I saw a white screen, but I was like, let me just keep it going. Where did I leave off? Where was I when I
So the last thing we heard was when you were sharing about what the person had asked you about what you like about living in Chicago.
Oh, okay. Yes. And my response was, Chicago is kind of like, I look at it like you look at your family member. You have your gripes, you have your issues that you share privately, but overall, it's a place that you have just love for. And it shaped me, and it was really important and very formative in terms of guiding me to where I am professionally today. So I'll explain a little bit why. At the time, I came up in the 70s in Chicago, and we lived in a project called Altgeld Gardens. You may or may not be familiar with it, but it's one of the worst projects in Chicago, along with Cabrini Green and several others. And in that project, there was a lot of poverty, there was a lot of violence. I got into fights constantly to the point where my mom was like, look, I can't help you. She just told me, she's like, unless you learn how to fight yourself, I really can't be there for you. So I actually was given the license to fight. That was the kind of environment that I was in, although my mom was extremely disciplined and very focused on our education and she was very aspirational. She basically said, in this environment, you have to learn how to fight. And so but at the time, Chicago was, and in some ways it still is, one of the most segregated cities in the United States. And there was a woman named Dorothy Cottrell that in 1976 decided to file a lawsuit against the city of Chicago, claiming that those that live in Chicago in certain area codes and in certain sections, because of the segregation, were being resigned to a life that was not affording them the opportunities that others were being afforded, and that it was discrimination and racism as a result. And so she actually won the lawsuit. And what resulted from that win was the decision to start the Gautreaux program named after her. So my family ended up being one of the first 10 families to take part in the Gautreaux program. They moved families who were living in poverty to some of the wealthiest suburbs around Chicago. So we went from dodging chicken bones in the street and broken glass and fighting to all of a sudden being around rolling green grass, parks with swings still attached, pools, people with elevators in their homes. We lived in a very, very wealthy area, but we integrated that neighborhood. We were the first Black family. There was a lot of racism, of course. We would come out in the mornings before going to school, and we'd find our car would be egged. It had dried egg on it. It would have ketchup, dried ketchup, mustard, notes in the windshield. It was a huge change for me, especially as the oldest of three girls. I was, I think, the most aware of what was happening around us, and I wasn't happy. I didn't like it. Very uncomfortable. I had that first year. Teacher was awful. to me in school. We'd walk to school and there'd be people yelling expletives at us down the street. I mean, we were little children and we were dealing with this as the first Black family. And I was quite depressed at some point. I told my mom, I was like, I don't have any friends. I don't like school. I want to go back home, meaning Chicago. And she said, well, we're not leaving. There's opportunities here and we're strong. We're going to fight through this. You're going to get through this. She suggested that I write. And she bought me a diary to write in. And to me, that seemed absurd. I was like, how is this going to win me friends? How is this going to change the way people treat me to write down my feelings? And so I rejected her first suggestion that I write down my feelings when we first got out there. And then that summer, my mother decided to go back to college and finish her bachelor's degree. And because we couldn't afford a babysitter, she left us in the college library all day, me and my two sisters. And so we ended up being nursed by books for the entire summer. And it was during that time that I fell in love with books. All three of us did. We were reading, ripping through everything. We were reading everything, even some of the college books. I read the stories of Beverly Cleary and Judy Blume and Roald Dahl and the person that wrote Little House on the Prairie. I read all of those books. And one of the things, I loved them so much. I finally was finding characters that I felt like young girls that I could relate to. But what was missing was girls that looked like me, girls that had my experience. Girls that had to fight to go to school every day and then move to another neighborhood and found themselves fighting again. And it was glaring to me. I was like, where are my stories? Where's my story, about Black families and about what we're dealing with? It was almost as if we were erased. And so at the end of that summer, I decided to take my mom up on her suggestion that I write. And I said, well, I'm going to write my story. And so it was about a month outside of school starting again, but I spent that last month of the summer just typing. Yes, I'm giving my age away. On my mother's typewriter, typing away, using the reverse button to white out to correct, words. And I spent a good month writing what I felt was my story about a young Black girl having to deal with the trials and tribulations of living in an all-white suburb and a Black family. And at the end of it, it was about 16 pages that felt like a book. And so my mother rewarded me by actually getting it bound and turning it into a book. That was my first experience of seeing myself, what I felt like was published. And I really have never stopped writing since. I continued throughout the time that we spent in the suburbs, writing my stories, expressing my feelings, being very, very observant. I was naturally curious anyway. Another thing that I started realizing when I was living out in the suburbs, because we often went back home to Chicago to see our cousins on the south side and on the west side of Chicago. And we'd spend, a good amount of time with them. And I just saw the stark difference between the way they were living and the way we were now living. We were considered the rich family, even though we were living in the suburbs on food stamps and still trying to make our own way. We were considered now amongst our family members, the privileged ones. And there was such a stark difference. And I had so much love for my family members and so much admiration for some of these cousins. And I couldn't understand why they were living this way. And we had access, to incredible, opportunities. They were taking us to Washington, D.C. on trips. And, I had an opportunity to study abroad 1 year in South America. And swings attached. That's a big deal. Even having swings, period. Those types of things, those differences made me realize that there was a color divide, a serious color divide in terms of what a certain race deserved, supposedly, and another race deserved. And as a young child, to come into this kind of awareness and not have some sort of reconciliation in my mind about why it is this way, just drove me to be even more curious, to always be that person that's pulling back the curtain and looking behind the curtain, like for more, what's there, because what we see in front of us, I learned at a very young age, What we see with our own two eyes often is just half the story. What the life that we're living, what we see surrounding us, our environment is just half the story, and it doesn't define you. So my family didn't become a better family, and a more important family just because we were in a different environment. And that's what this life, this world, this society might tell you, that your circumstances that you can see visibly around you define who you are. And I was able to begin to separate that concept and that idea, moving between those two worlds so often, and understanding that it's about humanity. I also want to point out that even though we did experience, a lot of racism at that time, um, the concept of humanity also began to rise inside of me, because there also were folks that would leave notes under our doors saying, "Welcome. I hope you guys are doing well. If you need anything, let me know." There were times for Thanksgiving that we'd show up and there'd be a whole basket of food and a turkey, a free turkey for us. And, at a time that we just couldn't afford those things. There was one Christmas where my principal of my school showed up with literally a station wagon, because back then we had station wagons, a station wagon full of presents for us for a Christmas. Now, at that time, we had about 6 presents under the tree, two for each of us, me and my sisters. He came and there were presents overflowing like all throughout our living room, and dropped them off. And he said that there was an older gentleman he knew who asked him if he knew of a family that could appreciate some gifts. And he said that he thought about our family. And of course, it wasn't until some years later that I realized that my principal brought all those gifts and made up that story for us. So it really, at the end of the day, I often, go back to race, because race is very prescient. It's ever present. It's something that, in our country, in terms of the way it was founded, will always be something we contend with. But I also remind people to always fall back on and trust humanity too, because that's where we're trying to get at each other's core, at the humanity of each other. Because there's beautiful people of all stripes in the world. And so back to the writing. I continued writing, and ended up going to college at the University of Illinois, and got a degree, pursued a degree in business administration and Spanish. And at the end of those 4 years, I decided I wanted to get an advanced degree and wasn't sure what to get it in. I thought that because I'd taken several languages, I was going to be an ambassador or a consulate officer or something like that. And I really started thinking about, what it was that moved me. What's my passion? I wanted to do some sort of cross-cultural outreach, which is why I believed I wanted to be an ambassador. I definitely wanted to be in a position where I can show that humanity is a beautiful thing and can be. I want to model a good version of humanity, and just, learn as many languages as possible. But how would I get there? And what I realized was, even in college, no matter what grade I got on any of my papers, whatever I was doing, I often was told at the top of my paper, "You're an excellent writer." I could have gotten a C on a project, and they would say, "But you wrote it well." And I said, "You know what? Why don't I think about writing?" I never had really, up to that point, even though it had been my passion and something I did all the time, never saw it as a career. Just saw it as this something I did. And the reason I share that story is that a lot of times we miss, when we're trying to decide what it is we want to go into as a profession, and as an entrepreneur. And we let money guide us. We let the things that we feel are making money out there guide us. And although that's not an entirely terrible approach to deciding how you want to start a business, or what you want to start the business in, it's not entirely terrible. The approach that's really going to coalesce the universe for you and really make things move and happen for you is going to be that approach that speaks to the core of who you are and what you do well and what moves you and what you're passionate about. And there's always an opportunity, if you're creative and if you Okay. But it can be something, if you're creative, that you can turn into something that is marketable. Just spend the time thinking about it. And, if anyone wants to ask me any questions, I'm actually really good with helping people formulate ideas on how to turn their passion into something that can be revenue earning. That's something I've helped my family with. That's something that I'm doing right now. And so, yeah, so my beginnings in living in kind of both sides of the world is what brought me into journalism. So I decided to apply to journalism, some journalism programs. I got into Northwestern's Medill School of Journalism, and struggled there the first year. I was on academic probation, and I worked super hard. Came back and ended up being elected the class president in my second year. So that was pretty amazing for me. After I finished journalism school, I had a wonderful opportunity to work for La Congresista Nidia Velasquez. She's the first Puerto Rican congresswoman to be elected to the House of Representatives. Because I had taught myself Spanish and had spent some time studying abroad, she was looking for someone who was a very strong writer in both English and Spanish. And so here I was, a journalist who also spoke Spanish. When she saw my resume, they called me in. They didn't expect to see this face show up. But the interview went well. And so I started working on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. for a couple of years as her press secretary and communications director, writing all of her statements in English and Spanish. I loved that job, actually. I didn't expect to. Wasn't a very politically minded person, but it opened me up to understanding the process of government, the process of how communities work, even on a micro level. And I would later learn why that was valuable. At the time, I didn't know. But what that also did was put me on the PR track. It took me out of journalism and actually placed me on the public relations track. And public relations is kind of considered the bastard child of journalism. I didn't have any clips. So after deciding to leave that job after a couple of years, I was having a lot of difficulty getting any newspapers or any magazines or any publications to pay attention to me, because I didn't have any writing samples besides press releases and floor statements and op-eds that I had written. So I ended up on the PR track for about a good 8 years. I was in public relations, started doing healthcare public relations. I even worked for a public affairs firm that represented Monsanto, which now I know is like the devil. At the time, the way they pitched themselves as feeding the world. I actually wrote their entire script for their floor presentation. When you first come into these offices back in the day, back in the 90s, you'd walk in and you'd see these moving panels with narration and photos with the narration when you'd be sitting in the visitor center. And I wrote Monsanto's script. So which proves that I was a very strong writer even back then in my early 20s. But now I wish I could take some of that back, because I really believed at the time in Monsanto feeding the world. And now we know the truth, but I digress. But I was stuck on the PR track. I worked in public affairs and then went on to work in healthcare public relations, and then decided to launch my own business in 2000 called the Original Media Group. It was a very scary time for me, but I had a couple of clients approach me about doing press releases. Like I said, I was a strong writer, so I wrote excellent press releases. I wrote excellent bios, and so I had two smaller clients approach me, and I felt it was enough to inspire me to go out on my own. Of course, they call it beginner's luck. Everyone gets that at the beginning of their entrepreneurial journey. I'm digressing a little bit, but I want to share that beginner's luck is something that happens when you first launch. It's a moment. It lasts usually between 6 to 12 months, where things are just flying high, and you're like, I'm on my way. This is it. I made the right decision. And then all of a sudden, you're dropped down, like from the heavens to destitute. And I experienced that. So that beginner's luck is the universe telling you to go ahead, to move ahead. and it's inspiring you and telling you you can do this. But then you hit reality, and a lot of times people think that that's the end. This is it. I made a mistake. This is failure. It didn't even last a year, or it didn't even last 6 months. And I thought it was something big. Push past that. The race doesn't go to the fastest. It goes to the one that endures. And that saying is so true when it comes to entrepreneurship. There's going to be highs and lows. You can count on them. Just prepare yourself for them. But each time the high gets higher and the low gets not as low. So it begins to eventually start to level out. But you're going to experience those things, and you have to prepare yourself to push past it. And maybe even take a second job. I was waiting tables at times, at the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey. I had to take odd jobs to make it through those times where I was down, but inevitably I would come right back up. And so I was doing PR mostly. And then in 2008, a friend approached me because she'd heard me whining for years about having lost my way from journalism and wanting to get back in it, but I had no clips. And plus it didn't help that I was doing fairly well in public relations as a writer. And so she approached me and she said, I saw, here's an article I want to share with you. It's an ad actually from the New York Times. They're looking for writers, but they're looking for writers to work on this experiment, this hyperlocal experiment called The Local. You might want to apply with them. I was like, the New York Times? She's like, yeah, it might actually work because they're looking for writers who live in the neighborhood and who work in the neighborhood. And they're looking for writers in Clinton Hill, Fort Greene, Clinton Hill, and you live in Fort Greene, Clinton Hill. And so I approached them, and of course their response was they weren't paying these writers. They were looking for stringers, for people to volunteer. So they were having a little bit of a challenge getting very good writers to work for free. But I was willing to do it, and I approached them, and their response was, where are your clips? Where's your writing? I showed them press releases. They're like, no, sorry, we can't go with this. And I harassed them for about a year. I harassed one of the editors for about a year, saying, can you please give me a chance? Here's another piece that I just wrote. It's not published, and eventually after a year, she gave me a chance. And that finally, after it was about 15 years since graduating from college, that I finally was placed back into journalism and placed at one of the most formidable papers and worked with an editor at the most formidable paper. So everything was coming full circle. And it was amazing for me to look back. And now when I look back and see how everything worked out, it wasn't the journey and the track that I would have guessed for myself or wanted for myself, but it was the journey that I needed, and it prepared me for each of the next moments. And so being there working all of a sudden with a New York Times editor who was helping to kind of bring me back into the fold of journalism, and working closely with her, she believed in me. She saw my writing. And she's like, well, you're rusty in journalism. You're a great writer, but the journalism, you're rusty. And she got me back on point. And I was writing for them for 2 years before they decided to close the Local. And then after they closed the Local, they referred me to a new hyperlocal experiment that was opening from AOL called Patch. So having that reference and that referral from New York Times to Patch was amazing. And I got the job, and I ended up as the editor of Patch for all of Bedford-Stuyvesant at the time that I had just moved from Fort Greene, Clinton Hill to Bedford-Stuyvesant. It was amazing how things kind of fell into place. And so I worked at AOL's Patch for 3 years. And it was something new in the neighborhood at the time, because we did not have a paper that was dedicated locally to Bedford-Stuyvesant at that time. And so I had an opportunity to really be on the ground meeting everybody, from the local elected officials to the small business owners to the residents. I was going to the community board meetings. I was humping. I mean, they really, really had us working. And Bedford-Stuyvesant has a population of over 300,000 people. It's like a small city. So I was, basically running a small city paper for Patch. And it was a fantastic experience for me. Um, People to this day still call me the patch girl, even though I've, for the past 13 years, I've had the Brooklyn Reader that I founded. But I'm still known in many circles as the patch girl. But after those 3 years, they were struggling with getting the community to buy into the advertising model that they had set up. They thought that on a hyper local level, which is basically local reporting, but more granular and more focused on block by block reporting. And so that's what we were doing. And that was what was opening up now in news. And so, I was working for them in that, and they were not able to, they thought that by scaling down on a hyper local level, they'd be able to get local advertisers, small businesses, in the same way that major papers get, the corporate advertisers to take out ads. So papers, basically their revenue, it comes from two places, primarily subscriptions and revenues. Subscriptions and advertisement. And so the advertisement model, they felt, oh, we have all these small businesses, they'll take out ads once we have a local paper going. And that didn't happen. And they were befuddled, why that wasn't happening at the hyper local level, that small businesses weren't taking out advertisements. So they ended up shutting down. And they told all of us who were representing all the patches in the neighborhoods across Brooklyn, over a voicemail. They told us to call this number. They sent an email and told us to call this number. And we called the number, and all of us got a voicemail telling us that we were let go that day. It was devastating for me. I, at that point, had about a 5-year run in journalism, and I wasn't really sure what I was going to do. It was all over the news that Patch had folded, that, not only had New York Times local had folded, but Patch had folded as well, for the same reasons, that the revenue model wasn't working, in terms of getting on a hyper local scale, in terms of getting, the economies of scale to buy into a small paper. And so, ended up, I was thinking about going back to the Times and seeing if they'd hire me paid as a regular writer, when I was approached by two elected officials, one who is a U.S. congressman now, and the other one who's has completed her run as a city councilwoman. And both of them said, to me, Zawadi, we never had this type of reporting in our neighborhood before, where it was from a person of color that understood who we were, that understood our struggle, that understood our problems, but could articulate it in such an amazing way and without bias. And a lot of that had to do with my upbringing. It had to do with the fact that I came from where they were from. I was from the projects. Many people wouldn't be able to guess that now, but I let people know, I may speak properly in a certain way and carry myself a certain way, and which I'm not ashamed of, but I know what it is. I still have family in the projects, and there's not a Black American on the face of this earth that is not 1 degree separation from a family member who is living in poverty. That's just the way. Oh, even Oprah will tell you she's got family members who, down south, who struggled, unless she's helped them at this point. But so I still have those touch points. We all do. We never lose them. And I still have that passion. It's important that our voices are represented by those who've experienced and know who we are. And as opposed to helicopter reporting, people coming in from New Jersey or coming in from Massachusetts to report on a neighborhood that, to them, it becomes one note, it becomes crime and entertainment. And so what they were seeing, what these elected officials told me they were seeing, is a beautiful fabric of a picture, a mosaic of who we were as a full person. And because that's my vision of the Black community. We are full people. We are amazing people. We are like extremely dynamic, resilient, and that was communicated in the writing style and the choices of stories that I chose to cover. So, they asked me to stay on. They said, why don't you keep it going? I said, well, Patch closed because they couldn't finance it. They said, that's Patch. There's like, if you are a small mom and pop business and AOL is knocking on your door asking for $6,000 in ads and you've never seen them before, and they're thinking just because they have this paper and they're in your town, they've never spoken to you, would you take out an ad? And I said no. They said, like, but everybody knows you, Zawadi. They've known you from back New York Times. You've been reporting for a while, and they trust you. It's like, if you go and knock on these businesses' doors and say, I'm thinking about starting a paper, and ask for like $100 ad for 1 month. It doesn't have to be, $3, $4, $5, $6,000. Ask for $100 ad. Go to 50 businesses. There you'll have $5,000 to get yourself started. And so I did that. And when I tell you, every single business pulled out their checkbook, wrote me a check, or told me, where can I donate? We want to keep this going. We definitely. So a lot of part of the lesson that I had understood and learned is that communities need representation and voice by those that are from the community and or understand them. And trust is also needed, for us, for underrepresented communities to pull out our checkbooks and write a check. And my experience, my love, my natural love for, and the screen that I looked through, the eyes that I looked through at my community was one of love. It wasn't one of crime and despair and tap dance, basketball. It wasn't just that. I'm like, of course we can do well, there's those amazing entertainment things, but we have skills that are like boundless and incredible. I see it in my aunts. I see it in my great grandparents. I see it everywhere. And my cousins that still live on the south side of Chicago. And so through that filter is what came out in the types of stories that I covered. They weren't all necessarily positive, but they were full. They were robust. They gave us an opportunity to look in the mirror and not feel bad about it. So our relationship with news, historically, and even within my own family, has not been one that's positive. My family, we didn't watch the news as much as I do now. Like, I'm a news junkie, but I began to understand why we had this contentious relationship with news, is because when we look at it, we feel like a target. It makes us feel bad. And who's going to continue to tap into something that makes you feel less than valuable or important or subhuman or violent, when that's not you, when that doesn't represent your family? And so, because I never saw that, because I saw so much more, I saw brilliance all day long, that's what came out of the type of stories that I recognized and chose to follow and cover. There were also issues that I felt were important to raise within our community. Of course, we had challenges, with crime, with police, with all of those things. Those too got covered, but they were covered differently, because the way I even see our relationship as it exists with police officers is quite different than what someone on the outside might see. So it was the difference made a huge difference, and it allowed me in 2013 to raise enough money to launch the Brooklyn Reader. And something I'm very proud of. Here I went from, a young girl being called the N-word, walking down the street to school, and feeling isolated and wondering why our stories weren't being told. And I look up today and just marvel at the fact that I'm doing what I love for the community that I love in the way that I love to do it. And so yeah, that's my journey. That's my story. How much time? We don't have much time. It's 12:40. So I'll take questions if you guys have questions.
Did you want to share your clip? I would love to see one of your clips that now you do actually have clips to share with folks. I would love to see it. I know Medi had it. About how long was it?
Well, each of those videos that were created for the COVID-19 Writers Project are about between 20 to 30 minutes. I was going to show 2 to 3 minutes. I know that you said we were going to 12:45. I don't know if there's enough time, because there's some explanation that goes behind it. Did you want to get into that?
Fine. We have until 1. So it's a full hour. So I think if we share some of that and then we could come back in and wrap up together, I think that would be beautiful. I would really love to actually see some of your work in action, even if it's only 2 or 3 minutes. Plus, I think the community deserves to see some of your work and what it could be like. And yeah.
Okay. So the COVID-19 Writers Project, the concept was born in April of or actually late May, April of 2020, at the start of the pandemic. As a news publisher, one of the first things I noticed was that as I was reporting the news, is that as we were scrambling around trying to figure it out, if you guys can go back to 2020, March, April 2020, we were trying to figure out what was what. Like, is this real? Do we really need to wear masks? Is this really going to happen to us? Or is the government exaggerating, or is this a major thing? And so people were all over the place. News all of a sudden became front and center. We were considered essential workers, and not many people, know that we also were we were designated part of those that were supposed to keep going. And so we got very, very busy in a very short amount of time, like overnight. But what I noticed in our coverage was that everybody's response to COVID was quite different, and a lot of it had to do with their socioeconomic background, or their socioeconomic standing, I guess I should say, in the neighborhood. And we weren't talking about that. And it reminded me so much. I was having a conversation with my husband at the time, and I said, I always reference the Federal Writers Project, which is part of the WPA, the Works Progress Administration. It was started in the late 30s by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt after World War II, to kind of revitalize the nation, bring us back, lift our spirits, get us back into folk storytelling, into creative arts, just to kind of breathe some more life into the country again. And one of those programs that he funded was called the Federal Writers Project. So he sent a bunch of writers out. I mean, Zora Neale Hurston, there were some major Black writers too that were commissioned to go out and gather stories in the most remote corners of our country. And so what ended up happening is that a lot of these writers went out to, the Allegheny Mountains, to these remote places that we don't normally hear stories from, and started finding out to the South, deep South, and started running into former slaves at the end of their life. Now, remember, it's 1930, around the late 1930s. These were former slaves at the end of their lives, and they could still talk about slavery. And so they started gathering these narratives and oral narratives. They started recording them, like right in the nick of time. And they ended up, all these recordings, they started focusing on them then, and they became what there is known as the slave narratives. And you can find them now in the Library of Congress. They're considered some of the most important historical archives and documents in the U.S. Library of Congress. So you can still access them actually on the internet. But anyway, so I often refer to the FWP in a lot of the work that I do in terms of the importance of capturing our voices before the narrative is told for us, or before the narrative is erased. And that was the perfect example. And I said, we need to capture the voices of people going through this pandemic at the very beginning, and all the way till, when we can, as this is happening. And we need to because I felt that, there's this book called The Art of War by Sun Tzu. And in the book, the biggest takeaway is that you can tell a person's character by the weapons they choose in war. Okay. Do they choose to fight with their fist? Do they choose to use a knife? Do they choose to use their mouth and argue? Do they choose to use a gun? All those different things say a lot about a person's character and how they choose to fight and how they choose to survive. It says everything about your character. It's a great, brilliant book. So I was like, we're in the midst of a war, so to speak. What's the reaction from the government, from our U.S. government, from our city government, from our state government, and from our U.S. government, to dealing with this crisis that we're in? It's going to speak a lot about who we are. It's going to uncover a lot about, who we are as a country. So we need to start capturing these narratives. And I applied for a couple of grants, got them right away from National Geographic. I got one from Pulitzer Center. I got one from American Medical Association, gave me one. And we started working on gathering these narratives. And it's called the COVID-19 Writers Project, C19WP, very similar to the WPA. So what we're going to show is some clips. So the project ended up resulting, it was a multimedia project. We created 20 videos. We created from 50 hours of footage. We created a photo essay. We created written essays. So it's a multimedia project. I'm showing you the video, one of the videos. And the videos, we have 10 videos total, and they kind of go on an arc from crisis, when we first heard about the pandemic hitting us, to response, looking at our response, to devastation when we're right in the eye of the storm and everybody, a lot of people are dying and the hospitals are piling up the bodies outside, to awakening, which is the George Floyd protest when everybody all of a sudden just flew out and flooded the streets, to recovery, which at the time we thought was a recovery before the first variant. So we follow that timeline. I've actually captured people throughout that timeline and what they were thinking and what they were feeling. So the first video that we're going to look at, I think I gave you, did I give you devastation or awakening? Mehdi, which one did I get? I have two videos. I pulled two of the 10, so we can look at the
Let
first
her know
one.
which one you'd like to play first.
Oh, devastation. Okay, so devastation. This is when we're right in the eye of the storm, and yeah. So, and it's a compilation of different people from different walks of life. We're in Brooklyn.
A report released in early April found that Black and Hispanic New Yorkers were dying from COVID-19 at almost twice the rate of white New Yorkers. Consequently, Brooklyn, a borough with large populations of Blacks and Hispanics, also had the highest number of coronavirus cases. New York City Mayor de Blasio, at a press conference, pointed to pre-existing conditions and very clear inequalities in healthcare as reasons for the disparity. However, there were also those who worked inside healthcare who believed the root of the problem was far greater than America's healthcare system. They believed that although the disparity was most visible in health outcomes, the real problem was not isolated to healthcare and less visible to the naked eye.
The pandemic revealed to me, as it did with many other people, I think this lack of awareness and this invisibility of people in this country and people's experience. COVID elevated the conditions in which people live, the inequities in which they have, and how their lives aren't valued as human beings. And because it's so widespread across this country and the world, it's really hard for people to turn away from. They can ignore it, but it's really hard to turn away from in a way that they were able to before. And so the opportunity in it, and especially for us in the health equity space, is that we've been able to kind of really put our voice forward and express this is how we have been for a long period of time. This is not new. How people are able to care for themselves and be healthy, again, is very much rooted in their structures and the conditions and the opportunities and the power that they have within the spaces and places that they live.
When we think about the fact that our society is largely based on that racial hierarchy that I just mentioned, where Black and non-white people occupy the bottom, least empowered rungs of society, they are disproportionately the laboring class. They are disproportionately the group, particularly in a city like New York, that is going to be engaged in those types of jobs that simply cannot be done from home. They're going to be your doormen and doorwomen. They're going to be your mail and package delivery service representatives. They're going to be your Uber Eats and your food delivery service. They're going to be the people who are really in positions where if they do not do these jobs, those of us who were privileged enough to stay home essentially do not have even the few joys, I should say, of society that we were able to claim during this virus. They are the ones that literally keep the city going. They're going to be the bus drivers, the maintenance workers. They're going to be the train and transportation drivers. And so when we're thinking about who is occupying those rungs of society? They are disproportionately Black and brown people. And when your housing is substandard because of disinvestment in housing policy or housing policies that favor white, wealthy people over the needs of the poor or working class, when your schools are underfunded and under-resourced, and you don't have access to the same learning and educational opportunities as your white counterparts, when your access to economic opportunity is stunted because of systemic racism that is either going to, one, not allow you to overcome the obstacles of housing and education and security such that you still have an equitable shot at getting a well-paying job, or all of these things due in part to that structural racism, you're left with employment choices that are the least desirable.
We see this not just with COVID-19, but across many different kinds of health issues, both infectious diseases and chronic diseases, that there are disparities in that Black and Latino communities are much higher risk across a myriad of health issues. And a lot of it has to do with access to care, but access to care is just one component. So, you know, there's also where people live, having the ability and capacity to be aware of disease risk, to even know, like, especially with chronic illness, but also with COVID-19. COVID-19 in many ways, for many people, is silent. Many people who are
Okay, so I just asked them to stop it there. So this goes on for 20, 30 minutes. I want to point out that even though it started out with 3 experts, we have a cross-section of people from a cross-section of ethnicities, professions. We've got regular house mothers, we've got sanitation workers, we've got a homeless, 2 homeless people who speak. We have someone as young as 13. So we really try to get a nice cross section. And I encourage you, on YouTube, you can find them, and also on the Pulitzer Center site, pulitzercenter.org site, you can find all these videos and you can watch them all. Just put in COVID-19 Writers Project, and it's very interesting. I tell you, I don't know if we're ready to go back to that time yet. I think we're ready to jump forward. But in case you do want to continue watching this series, just put in COVID-19 Writers Project and you can see the entire thing. But it did exactly what I was hoping it would do, and really brought out a beautiful cross-section of people's experiences. And I wanted 50, 100 years from now for this to be an archive the same way the slave narratives are, and that people to be able to look back and see who we were as a country, what we were feeling, what we were actually going through. I didn't want the narrative retold a different way, a conclusion to be drawn that was neat and fit into a box. I wanted the truth to be told in that moment. So these people are speaking in the moment of these things happening. So yes.
Beautiful. So I definitely want to thank you for that. I love the fact that it's done in a way where it actually breaks it up, because so I'm a believer in we're given everything that we, like you said at the top, that we're given everything we need, and it can sometimes come in forms that you don't even realize. So we're so powerful that when we are maybe slightly being a little triggered, technology can start to go. I've had no problem with my technology until the video started. I could hear nothing. But what I did hear at the very top is when you had said, and this may be someone else in the community, so I just want to offer them an opportunity to breathe and just know that this work is all important, that all parts of it is important. Because when you mentioned the whole part about March and where we were just starting, I had lost my grandmother to it on February 8th. So I was already in it. So, and then lost her sister, 2 of her sisters, actually one in January. So it had started for my family from January. They were in nursing homes. So the, the word came so much later, not knowing. And I kind of like went there with emotions, and zap, there goes my internet, starts acting up. But I know that I definitely want to go and jump straight forward. I may not be ready for devastation yet, but I'm definitely looking forward to watching Awakening and watching the other pieces, because at the end of the day, it's all a part of our history. And it is important. It is important to hear the different voices of it and the different experiences, because as bad as it all was, a lot of good has come out of it. A lot of learning to connect on a different level. Our standing for the Black Lives Matters that summer, I believe that all of it was fueled from being, inside, and just having a moment to tap into what was really important. Whereas before, when we had those instances happen, while we had the voices there and the fight was already going on, a lot of times we were so busy hustling and bustling with our daily lives that we weren't able to be as present and as committed to the transformation. And I feel like that happened. We were able to bring other BIPOC voices in to support us, and it just fueled the movement, on top of Floyd's, thank you for mentioning his name, and his experience and how he left us. It made an impact, and it was not for nothing.
Yes.
So I heard definitely so much juice and meat in this. I'm going to wrap this up really nicely. I'm going to offer that the community, if they have any questions, feel free. I know that I would ask you, Zawadi, when you are done, to go check the Facebook, like the Facebook post, because you have someone there that says, oh my God, I was featured in the BK Reader in 2018 with my Camp Wakanda. Wow, honor to meet you, Queen. So you may want to go and just chat with your engager there. And so I definitely heard that from whence we came does not have to define us.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
even when our parents are not as amazing as yours are and know how to step out, we have others in places and spaces that we can tap into, that we don't have to only be our experience of what we're experiencing where we are presently. I heard that following the yellow brick road. So I've always been a fan of that actual, what would you call that? The comparing life to the yellow brick road, and how you could have 1 brick, 2 bricks, 10 bricks, but they can all equal that road, and that road could actually land you in your field of dreams and goals.
Well, can I add something else? Because I love the Wizard
Yeah.
of I love the Wizard of Oz as well. Every time I think about pulling back the curtain, I think about the Wizard of Oz. Okay. So you're thinking that things are one way, you pull back that curtain and you see it's a little man back there. It's a regular person. Like, you deserve so much more than what's put in front of you. You're going to have certain things set in front of you to tell you that this is all you're worth. This is as far as you're going to go. And it's so not true, but you have to push. You have to pull back that curtain and look what's going on behind there. What else y'all got? What's back there? And get it. Go get it.
And that actually leads me into the last piece that I definitely wanted to definitely tap into before you depart us today. And that is your belief in the saying of be your own goals.
Yes, that's thank you for adding that. That's one of my favorite. It's a new saying of mine, so I can't say it's one of my favorite. It's a new saying. It's one that I really, that resonates with me so much, because that's who I've always been. Is and when I say your own, I mean your own could be not only just you as an individual, your community, the from whence you came, everything that you come from, your roots have everything that you need. It has the nutrients, everything that you need to grow in the way that you need to grow. We need to stop modeling ourselves after those that we see on social media. We usually had hashtag goals all the time, always thinking about, oh, I wish I could have a husband like that. I wish I could. You don't know what else is going on with their situation. Don't be anybody else's goals, because you might end up, if you did have that husband, you might be ending up getting your own.
Okay, mirrors.
Yeah, like, you don't know what goes along with that. Be your own goals and set your own goals and try to get better today than the person you were the day before. And that's how you grow. Yeah.
Well, I hope to have you back with us, because you definitely have a lot of juice and meat. And I think that there's even deeper than we can go with this conversation. I want to thank from whence you came, because I can hear how we became your own goals. And when I say we, the community, I can hear that it started with the love and respect of your family that had both experiences on both sides, and you've carried that through your life. I would love to have you come back and talk about the experience with Monsanto, because sometimes we end up doing work that's not always aligned with us, and there's information behind that, I feel like. So hopefully you'll definitely come back and join us in the future. We'd love to have you, and thank you for being a self cheerleader.
Thank you, Jamie. It was a pleasure. I love today. Thank you for letting me express and share. And I'll be back.
Yes,
Bye,
thank you.
everybody.
See you, community. Thank you for
Bye.
Thank you.